Hello and welcome. Today we are continuing our study in the book of Judges. We are up to Judges chapter 9 and we'll be looking at Abimelech today. So get yourself a cup of tea and we'll get straight into it. The trigger warning for today is that this study will contain references to some extreme violence. Judges chapter 9 verse 1. Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal, went to his mother's brothers in Shechem and said to them and to all his mother's clan. So we'll just look at a few of the characters in this story. Who is Abimelech? Abimelech has also got a few other spellings, a few other pronunciations. Some might pronounce him Abimelech. For these purposes, I'll stick with Abimelech. He is the son of Gideon, who we see in Judges chapter 6, 7 and 8. And at this time, Gideon has died, so Abimelech has lost his father. His name means my father is king and is derived from the Hebrew word Ab, meaning father, and Melech, meaning king. Abimelech isn't really considered a judge as such. He wasn't called by God to lead part of Israel for a season. He was more a self-appointed leader. The context of this chapter begins in the previous chapter, Judges chapter 8. The story of Abimelech is connected to the story of Gideon, who's also known as Jerubbaal in Judges 8. Abimelech is the son of Gideon, and Abimelech puts himself as king over Israel by gathering support from his mother's hometown in Shechem and by murdering his brothers. Who is Jerubbaal? Jerubbaal is Abimelech's father, also known as Gideon, who is Abimelech's mother. Abimelech's mother lived in the town of Shechem. She wasn't the legal wife of Gideon, she was a concubine. So Judges 8 refers to her. He, Gideon, had several sons of his own, and he had many wives. His concubine, who lived in Shechem, also bore him a son, and he was called Abimelech. Generally, children of concubines in this town were considered children of the mother, and they lived with the mother's family. As Gideon didn't live in Shechem, Abimelech may have been raised solely by his mother within that household, and Gideon largely would have been absent from Abimelech's life. It's probable that Abimelech was well known by his mother's brothers and that they would have seen him growing up. So that's important to note as we go through this chapter. A bit about the town of Shechem. Today, Shechem is surrounded by the modern-day city called Nablus, but in the ancient times, Shechem was nestled between two mountains, Mount Gerizim in the south and Mount Ebor in the north. And although it's not easily defended, it is very well situated because it's in a fertile valley, there's springs and there's transport routes surrounding it. The town of Shechem was a place where Abraham went after God called him, and it is where God promised the land of the Canaanites to Abraham. Israel is also renewed its covenant at Shechem under Joshua's leadership. That's in Joshua 24, verses 1, 14 to 27. So Shechem was a place of promise, where God promised the land of the Canaanites to Abraham and where Israel promised to follow God. But the people in God in Shechem at this time in the book of Judges look more like the Canaanites than a faithful nation following God. At the time of the book of Judges, it is thought that Shechem was possibly a Canaanite city for three reasons. Firstly, Abimelech's name means son of the king, and the inhabitants of Shechem had made Abimelech their king, but appointing a king in Israel was not an Israel tradition at this time. God had forbade it, but it was a tradition that the Canaanites were doing at that time. The second reason why Shechem may have been a Canaanite city is that the city had a diviner's tree that's referred to in Judges chapter 9, verse 37, and divination was strictly prohibited in Israel. The third reason why Shechem may have been a Canaanite city is that in Shechem there is a temple that is dedicated to a Baal. It's called the Temple of Baal Berith. The reference is Judges 9 verse 4, and the Baals were Canaanite gods. So going on, verse 2, Abimelech, he asks the citizens of Shechem, which is better for you, to have all 70 of Jerubaal's sons rule over you, or just one man? Remember, I'm your flesh and blood. And when the brothers repeated all this to the citizens of Shechem, they were all inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, he is related to us. So Gideon's son Abimelech makes an appeal to his uncle and asks the citizens of Shechem who they would prefer to lead. Would they prefer to have Abimelech's 70 brothers lead them, or would they prefer to have just one man, himself? And he persuaded them by cunningly reminding them that they were family. Verse 4, they gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal-berith, and Abimelech used it to hire reckless scoundrels who became his followers. I'm not really clear whether the 70 shekels were just from Abimelech's uncles, or whether the 70 shekels were from the citizens of Shechem. But I'm leaning more toward the money being funded by all the men of Shechem. The men of Shechem responded to Abimelech by giving him 70 shekels of silver. And it's interesting to note, 70 shekels of silver for 70 brothers. The number 70 in the Bible generally symbolizes completeness and fullness. So this insinuates that the men of Shechem are in full support of the complete destruction of Abimelech's 70 brothers. The 70 shekels of silver were obtained from the temple of Baal-berith. Again, this is evidence that the citizens of Shechem were following the Baals rather than following God. The relatives of Abimelech on his mother's side gave him some start-up money to establish the leadership and to start a revolt. He hired worthless, reckless men to kill his brothers, making certain that there would never be a challenge to his leadership. Therefore, Abimelech killed his brothers with the support of his relatives on his mother's side. The men of Shechem supported the plan because it was good for them, not because it was morally good or right. So what's a silver shekel? A shekel was at first a unit of weight, and later it became a currency in ancient Judea. So in the New Testament, the shekel was a coin, a currency, but in the Old Testament, in the time of the judges, it was more a measure of weight, so 70 measures of weight of silver. So 70 shekels would have been about 800 grams, and today in 2025 it's valued at about $1,500 Australian dollars. When the temple of Baal-berith, Berith is the Hebrew word for covenant. So the temple was a covenant to the Baals. The reckless scoundrels that are referred to in Judges 9 verse 4 that Abimelech hired, he hired reckless scoundrels to become his followers. The Hebrew word for reckless implies empty vessels. They're worthless. They're morally and ethically worthless. They're idle and vain men. Who people associate with generally reveals their own character, and who Abimelech associates with reveals his own character. So perhaps he was morally empty too. Verse 5, he went to his father's home, he being Abimelech, he went to his father's home in Ophrah, and on one stone he murdered 70 brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal. But Jotham, the younger son of Jerubbaal, escaped by hiding. So Gideon had died in the previous chapter. So although it was the house of Gideon, Abimelech's father, Gideon himself wasn't there. So with the help of his hired men, Abimelech murders his 70 brothers on a single stone. It's not clear whether it happened on the same day though. Jotham, the youngest son of Gideon, survives the massacre of his siblings by hiding. Verse 6, all the citizens of Shechem and Beth Milo gathered beside the great tree at the pillar of Shechem to crown Abimelech as king. So we see all the citizens of Shechem supporting the crowning of Abimelech as king. Verse 7, when Jotham was told about this, that is the murder of his 70 brothers, he climbed upon Mount Gerizim, so that was next to Shechem, and he shouted to them, listen to me, citizens of Shechem, so that God may listen to you. So remember that Shechem is nestled in that nice valley. You've got Mount Gerizim to the south, Mount Ebor to the north, and Mount Gerizim overlooks the valley where Shechem is located. And the mountains, they form a natural amphitheatre to which this recitation can be easily heard. Jotham went to Mount Gerizim to speak to the people of Shechem, and Jotham offers a prophetic message against Abimelech, couched in a parable. So he says, one day the trees went out to anoint a king for themselves. They said to the olive tree, be our king. But the olive tree answered, should I give up my oil, by which both gods and humans are honoured, to hold sway over the trees? Next the trees said to the fig tree, come, be our king. But the fig replied, should I give up my fruit, so good and sweet, to hold sway over the trees? And then the trees said to the vine, come, be our king. But the vine answered, should I give up my vine, that both cheers goes both gods and humans, to hold sway over the trees? Finally, all the trees said to the thorn bush, come and be our king. And the thorn bush said to the trees, if you really want to anoint me as king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the thorn bush and consume the cedars of Lebanon. So what does this parable mean? And what do the trees symbolize in Jotham's parable? Jotham is speaking as a spokesman of God, similar to all the other prophets that we see in the Old Testament later on. He is using the genre of a parable, and this is the first parable that we see mentioned in the Bible. He depicts the city of Shechem's search for a king as trees asking for a king and being rejected again and again and again by the more valuable trees, but finally a worthless plant, a thorn bush, a bramble, agrees to be king. And the consequences are disastrous. So let's just look at the components of these trees. So the trees, when it refers to the trees, that's sort of representing Israel or Shechem. The olive trees, so olive tree, fig tree, grapefruit tree were the more important trees. Olives were historically prevalent throughout Israel and an important agricultural commodity. The Bible typically uses olives to symbolize peace and renewal and anointing. The fig tree is a highly prosperous tree throughout Israel, and the fig tree in the Bible is usually symbolic of Israel themselves. And it's considered, the fig trees were considered the sweetest fruit next to honey. Grapevine symbolises fruitfulness and prosperity. The vine was common in Israel for making wine. So those three trees were important, they were significant, they were valuable. But the thorn bush, the bramble with the briar, is a worthless and irritating plant. The weeds prevent other plants from thriving by using the soil's nutrients, by using the space, by using the sunlight, and consequently they deprive the more valuable plants from these elements and preventing them from thriving. The cedar of Lebanon is a majestic evergreen conifer, very prevalent through the Eastern Mediterranean. This tree represents generally sort of holiness and peace. So the thorn bushes and the brambles, they have no shade. The promise of the bramble saying, take shelter in my shade, was intended to be ironic and ridiculous. The bramble was a low, thorny bush and added no shade to no one, especially to trees. And when Jotham describes Abimelech as a thorn bush, describes Abimelech as a thorn bush, seeking to shade the other trees, this is intended to be interpreted as ridiculous and foolish. Verse 16, have you acted honourably honourably and in good faith by making Abimelech king? Have you been fair to Jerubbaal and his family? Have you treated him as he deserves? Remember that my father fought for you and risked his life to rescue you from the hand of Midian. But today you have revolted against my father's family. You have murdered his 70 sons on a single stone and have made Abimelech, the son of the female slave, king over the citizens of Shechem just because he was related to you. So Jotham, he accuses the men of Shechem of acting dishonourably by appointing a worthless king simply because he was related to them. Verse 19, so have you acted honourably and in good faith toward Jerubbaal and his family today? If you have, may Abimelech be your joy, and may you be his too. But if you have not, let fire come out of Abimelech and consume you, the citizens of Shechem and Bel-Milo, and let fire come out of you, the citizens of Shechem and Bel-Milo, and consume Abimelech. So Jotham asks a rhetorical question about whether the citizens of Shechem have acted honourably, and no, they have not. Jotham predicts that Abimelech will burn the citizens of Shechem and that the citizens of Shechem and Beth-Milo will eventually destroy Abimelech. And we'll see that play out later on. Then Jotham, verse 21, 22, then Jotham fled, escaping to Beer, and he lived there because he was afraid of his brother Abimelech. And after Abimelech had governed Israel for 3 years, God stirred up animosity between Abimelech and the citizens of Shechem, so that they acted treacherously toward Abimelech. So although it should not come to any surprise that there's conflict between Abimelech and the citizens of Shechem, because they are morally worthless. Their character is flawed. It's important to note here, though, that it is God who initiated up the stirring of animosity between Abimelech and the citizens of Shechem. The uprising against Abimelech is guided by God, and it's similar to what we see in 1 Samuel between King Saul and David. Just for that reference, 1 Samuel 16 verse 14. Now the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. Verse 24, God did this in order that the crime against Jerubbaal's 70 sons, the shedding of their blood, might be avenged on their brother Abimelech and on the citizens of Shechem, who had helped him murder his brothers. In opposition to him, these citizens of Shechem set men on the hilltops to ambush and rob everybody who came by, and this was reported to Abimelech. So God's purpose in stirring up dissent between Abimelech and the citizens of Shechem was to provide the ground for justice to be served out against the people of Shechem and against Abimelech for the slaughter of Gideon's 70 sons. Verse 26, now Gaal, son of Ebed, moved in with his clan into Shechem, and its citizens put their confidence in him. After they had gone out into the fields and gathered grapes and trodden on them, they held a festival in the temple of their God. While they were eating and drinking, they cursed Abimelech. Then Gaal, son of Ebed, said, who is Abimelech, and why should the Shemites be subject to him? Isn't he Jerubbaal's son, and isn't Zebul his deputy? Serve the family of Hamor, Shechem's father. Why should we serve Abimelech? If only the people were under my command, then I would get rid of him. I would say to Abimelech, call out your whole army. So Gaal is the son of Ebed. He's a new character into the story. He's come from outside the town of Shechem. He's now settled in Shechem. The Hebrew name for Gaal means to loathe and abhor. I'm not quite sure really who Gaal is. However, he did persuade the citizens of Shechem to put their confidence in him. Just as the fickle population had followed Abimelech, so now they are easily persuaded and deceived by the proposal of Gaal. The rebellion by Gaal is short-lived, and it ends poorly for all involved. Here's a quote from a commentator called Clark. The condensed moral of the whole fable is this: weak, worthless and wicked men will ever be foremost in thrusting themselves into power, and in the end bringing ruin upon themselves and upon the unhappy people over whom they preside. And we see that here. We learn that ungodly leaders can be deceptive in their persuasions, and we need discernment from the Holy Spirit when following Christian leaders. There's a reference to Hamor, which is Shechem's father. So presumably Shechem was the man who established the town of Shechem. And an interesting side note is the name Hamor means donkey, and maybe it's because it probably sounds like a noise that the donkey makes. Hamor, Hamor. Maybe it was more pronounced Hamor. Verse 30, when Zerubbabel, the governor of the city, heard that Gal, son of Ebed, was very angry, undercover he sent messengers to Abimelech, saying, Gal, son of Ebed, and his clan have come to Shechem and are stirring up the city against you. Now then, during the night, you and your men should come and lie in wait in the fields. In the morning sunrise, advance against the city. And when Gal and his men come out against you, seize the opportunity to attack them. So Zebul, the governor of Shechem, he appears to still be loyal to Abimelech, and he advises a strategic ambush against the city. Verse 34, so Abimelech and all his troops set up at night and took up concealed positions near Shechem in 4 companies. Now Gal, son of Ebed, had gone out and was standing at the entrance of the city gate, just as Abimelech and his troops came out from their hiding place. And when Gal saw them, he said to Zebul, look, people are coming down from the tops of the mountains. And Zebul replies, you mistake the shadows of the mountains for men. Verse 37, but Gal spoke up again, look, the people are coming down from the central hill, and a company is coming up from the direction of the diviner's tree. Then Zebul says, well, where is your big talk now? You said, who is Abimelech that we should be subject to them? Aren't these the men you ridiculed? Go out and fight them. So Gal went out to the citizens So Gal led out the citizens of Shechem and fought Abimelech, and Abimelech chased him all the way to the entrance of the gate. Many were killed as they fled. Then Abimelech stayed in Arumah, and Zebul drove Gal and his clan out of Shechem. The next day the people of Shechem went out to the fields, and this was reported to Abimelech. So he took his men, he divided them into 3 companies, and set ambush in the fields. Then he saw the people coming out of the city. He rose to attack them. Abimelech and the companies with him, they rushed forward to a position at the entrance of the gate. The 2 companies attacked those in the fields and struck them down. And all that day Abimelech pressed his attack against the city until he captured it, and he killed its people. And then he destroyed the city, and he put salt over the city. Wow. So what does it mean to scatter salt over a conquered city? So salting the earth, or sowing in salt is a term that's used as well, is the ritual of spreading salt on the site of cities that have been razed to the ground by the conquerors. It's originated as sort of a curse for rehabilitation, and the purpose of this practice was to ensure that the conquered lands could never be used again agriculturally, and to prevent the defeated army from ever being able to recover. The idea of salting the earth dates back to ancient times and was used by various other nations and civilizations as well. Verse 46, on hearing this, the citizens of the Tower of Shechem went to the stronghold of the people of El-Berith. When Abimelech heard that they had assembled there, he went up to Mount Zalmon, and he took an axe and cut off some branches, and he lifted them to his shoulders. He ordered the men with him, quick, do just as you have seen me do. So all the men cut branches, and they followed Abimelech, and they piled them against the stronghold, and they set it on fire with all the people inside. So all the people inside the tower of Shechem, about 1,000 men and women also died. Horrible. So the prophecy of Jotham that we saw back earlier in Judges 9 verse 15 was now fulfilled, as the men of Shechem are set on fire by Abimelech, and Abimelech's wrath is poured out on Gaal's army. It is then poured out on the people of Shechem, and then he's going to go to the neighbouring town of Thebes. Verse 50. Next, Abimelech went to Thebes and besieged it and captured it. Inside the city, however, was a strong tower, to which all the men and the women, all the people of the city had fled. They locked themselves in and they climbed up to the tower roof. Abimelech went to the tower and he attacked it. But as he approached the entrance to the tower to set fire on it, a woman dropped an upper millstone on his head and cracked his skull. So Abimelech goes and attacks Thebes in a similar way that he has attacked the tower in Shechem. However, a woman drops a millstone on his head and cracks his skull. So what's a millstone? There's a number of words for millstone in the Bible. Some refer to a small hand mill, could have been about this size, that was used in the home. It was somewhat portable, so you could lend it to your neighbour if they needed to use it. And other words for millstone are used for a community mill. So something that was so big it had to be drawn by a donkey. And the upper millstone was a large rock that sat on top of that, and it would have been about 15 inches in diameter, so a ruler and a half. And this word was used as the upper millstone. It means to be riding on top of the lower millstone. So the injury that he sustained from this millstone was extremely severe. And Abimelech knew that he would never recover from it. And in fact, he was destined to die from the impact of it. Verse 54. Hurriedly he, Abimelech, calls to his armor bearer, "Draw your sword and kill me so that they can't say, 'A woman killed me.'" So his servant ran him through and he died. And when the Israelites saw that Abimelech was dead, they went home. Verse 56. Thus the Lord repaid the wickedness that Abimelech had done to his father by murdering his 70 brothers. God also made the people of Shechem pay for their wickedness. The curse of Jotham, son of Jerubbaal, came on them. So the prophecy of Jotham that was in Judges 20 is now fulfilled in Thebes, as it is set on fire by Abimelech, and then Abimelech is destroyed. So this explains how God demonstrates his justice toward Abimelech for the murder of his sons. Abimelech's death is a dishonourable finish to a dishonourable life. And Judges 9 verses 56 to 57 serves as a commentary on a life of wickedness of Abimelech and Shechem. And there's a saying that people get the leaders that they deserve. It's a sad story to a sad end. But I hope you were enriched by studying Judges chapter 9 today. We'll see you next time. Bye.